James Myers will be reading Chapter 5, Meaning of Development, Worldviews, Behavior, and Ethics. Personal experience, culture, general intellectual, moral, and social states of the times, and the conceptual system that structures the way we view the world influence not only psychological theory and our ideas about the nature of humankind, but are inseparable from the way we live our lives and organize our world. The purpose of this chapter is to examine these relationships so that we may more clearly see the interrelatedness and interdependence of all things. We shall take an idea commonly accepted in everyday life in our society and examine it based on an Afrocentric worldview. In this exercise, we shall adopt a perspective different from the predominant perspective of our culture into which we have been socialized, putting into play the law of opposites in order to learn more about ourselves. We shall examine the concept of development and the multiplicity of determinants that shape its meaning. Our aim is to outline some of the hidden parameters of definition and define their implications for our psychology and our future. We shall start with the following questions. What is individual development or social development? How are they different? At some level, are they the same? On what basis is development determined and by whom? We shall apply our evaluations to nations and the implications to the future of our world. Defined by whom? At least three categories of definition of development is isolated or can be isolated. More exhaustive accounts can be found elsewhere. In our culture, economics or economic growth determine development. Specific criteria may apply. For example, a country is considered developed only if it reaches and sustains by its own efforts, a per capita gross national product of $500 to $1,000 and an annual growth rate of 5 to 7%. Although this view of development is not widely held today, it is apparent that it continues to have a strong impact on prevailing conceptions of the world. Considering development at the local, regional, and national levels, non-economic factors continue to be subordinated by economists and other social scientists. A second category of definition, common today, was summarized by Uthant at the beginning of the United Nations' first development decade. The definition suggests that development is economic growth plus social change. Social scientists differ, however, in the emphasis they place on economic, social, cultural, or political change processes. In their quest to avoid judging goals and achievements of economic growth, divisions of labor, and attitude changes that prioritize production, the value judgments that are clear and direct are rarely acknowledged as such, and suggestions that developed societies, because of their advanced status, serve as models for other societies are instead honored. The assumption is that modernization, industrialization, technological advancement, and the effects that come with them are evidence of growth and are inevitable for all societies. A minority of persons interested in development focuses on ethical values. Their definitions stress the qualitative improvement of life for all individuals, groups, and societies. Their perspective, sometimes characterized as the French school, has had its strongest impact in the area of religious writings on development. The most common understanding of the concept of development is noted in the Webster's New Collegiate Dictionary. Underdeveloped means failing to realize a potential economic level of industrial production and standard of living, as from a lack of capital. That only the economic definition is mentioned is not surprising, given the worldview, values, and belief systems that predominate in US culture. The same can be expected among the vast majority of nations that define themselves as developed, and other cultures with differing worldviews, values, and belief systems as underdeveloped or undeveloped. To suggest that something is expected implies that, based upon previous situations or circumstances, it is understandable or probable, not that it is correct, fair, or even reasonable. What then is development or underdevelopment? Both are artificially contrived concepts used to categorize nations, people, and/or cultures according to the worldviews, values, and belief systems of the definers. It is principally Western people, particularly Euro-Americans, who have been the leaders in proselytizing their points of view and definitions. Consequently, it is their standard criteria, which holds economics as central, that is most frequently heard. They have defined themselves as the first world, implying a definite segmented, disorderly, and historic hierarchical worldview whose epistemological base we recounted earlier. Examining the history of Western cultures closely, we see how the worldview that holds materialism as its basic underpinning yields a primary focus on economics. In cultures where materialism is the primary value, development is not likely to be thought of in terms of other than the material. The worldview is not holistic. Therefore, issues of human development that have to do with the qualities of life that cannot be easily quantified or marketed for personal profit will be minimized, if not ignored. Only superficial attention is paid to the long-term consequences of materialist motivated behaviors. Even so, cost-benefit analysis of the effects on human potential is seldom calculated. The limited and confining nature of the segmented worldview that characterizes first world cultures makes it impossible to perceive the whole and to function within nature's guidelines of balance. Yet, nations hurriedly embrace what they have been taught are the advancements of mankind, believing that the way of the so-called first world is inevitable, if not desired, the way to go. If we are not to be led down the path of self-destruction, however, the entire picture must be considered before informed decisions can be made. At the very best, we need to examine the psychosocial aspects of development from another worldview, a spiritual material examination of development. Regardless of the reasons behind behavior, we find comparatively greater insecurity and aggression, particularly in interracial, interethnic interactions in the first world group than among any other cultural or economic groups. In modern society, with chattel enslavement, Native American genocide, colonization, 2 world wars, the Jewish Holocaust, and more, we find first world examples of aggressive behavior unmatched in degree by any other cultural group. In my opinion, all of the factors we have discussed may come together at some level to account for the aggression, materialism, and survival orientation. But to gain complete understanding, the suboptimal worldview and conceptual system must be examined because it emerges as the most significant for differentiating people. From an Afrocentric perspective, it is important to observe how spirit manifests. Human behavior is spirit made perceptible to the senses. Through behavior, people tell us what it is that's in their consciousness, that is, the thoughts and emotions, and how they interact within a particular framework. From an Afrocentric perspective, it is important to observe how spirit manifests. Human behavior is spirit made perceptible to the senses. Through behavior, people tell us what it is that's in their consciousness, that is, their thoughts and emotions, and how to interact within a particular framework. Having colonized most of the world and holding positions of power over others for decades, a minority of people have become highly industrialized and utilize their technology to further their interests throughout the world. How can we account for this great disparity and dominance that has existed throughout so-called modern history? Explanations can be offered by tracing the history of the consciousness manifested or the evolution of the worldview and culture. At the level of generalized culture, there seems to be a correlation between race and domineering behavior. The fact that less than 10% of the world's population, which identifies itself as Caucasian, has been principally involved in colonial domination is meaningful and significant. They have managed to virtually subjugate people of color throughout the world. By the late 1960s, however, a majority of nations had fought for independence from these imperialists. Unfortunately, in many cases, colonial rule was replaced by colonial puppet rule, as for example, by neo-colonialists, people of color who adopted themselves and adapted themselves to the Western image, idea, and praxis. If we start with the premise that all humankind evolved from a single human gene pool, evidence indicates that our beginnings were in East Africa, later migrating to all the four corners of the earth. Based on laws of genetics, these must have been people of color, or we would not see the range of hues of skin color we witness today. According to a theory by Francis Cress Welsing, the Caucasian race, or Caucasoid race of today, began as a type of albino mutant of Negroid people of Africa. The lost pigmentation, a genetic mutation, marked these people. Albinism is the genetic inability to produce the enzyme tyrosinase, which is necessary for pigmentation. The albinos must have been isolated from the normal pigmented majority, or they separated themselves, migrating northward to escape the intense African sun. While the exact circumstances of the separation are difficult to determine, it is important to note that the beginning of the divergent patterns of development may have begun at this time. If Welsing's albinism thesis seems questionable, other theories leading to similar conclusions may be more plausible. For example, Bradley's theory of the Iceman inheritance. Bradley postulates that ancestors of Caucasian people were indeed Africans of color who migrated into the Northern Hemisphere, and that the coming and passing of the Ice Age in the Northern Hemisphere accounts for their physical and psychological differentiation. During the Ice Age, at the time of their habitation, somewhere between 100,000 BC and 10,000 BC, these people adapted to their environment, resulting in the physical and psychological makeup of the people we now identify as Caucasoid or Western. Racial designations have been made primarily on the basis of phenotypic differences that occur in skin color, hair texture, and physiognomic features or facial features. Explanations for these differences, the physical and psychological aspects, have been based, for the most part, on environmental adaptation or the interplay between heredity and environment. In Western thought, the history of the idea of race itself is tied to issues of economic and political subjugation, which has been purposeful and useful to Western powers. The theory offered here is that as Africans lived in climates that were harsher, colder, and less humid, they developed characteristics now identified as Caucasoid. People in the milder, warmer, more humid climates kept the traits designated under the classification of Negroid. As the environment exerted such a strong physical influence, it had equally significant psychological influences. In the harsh and cold environments where resources necessary to survival were limited. People experienced a great sense of insecurity and concern for material sustenance. They may have attempted to deal with these issues in many ways, but increased aggression seems to typify their reactions, the outcome of a long evolutionary cycle. According to Welsing, concerns about material sustenance and the development of aggressive behavior also explain what she describes as the people's war with nature, the reflection of God. Angry at God for their genetically recessive pigmentation, they sought to outcreate God and establish their own order. Welsing contends that even today, as awareness of this genetically recessive nature is expressed, it is expressed by feelings of susceptibility to extinction unless careful planning and research is undertaken. Contemporary concerns with genetic engineering, sperm banks, test tube babies, and so on are cited as evidence of the quest to produce and control life itself. Francis Quest Welsing suggests that the aggression of whites manifests through racism and oppression of people of color is a function of a basic inferiority based on the inability to produce color, hence the fear of extinction. Perceiving people of color as a threat to survival results in insecurity and aggression. The reason the white minority has dominated and subjugated peoples of color is to protect itself from annihilation, represented in its segmented view through practices that bring races together, particularly miscegenation. Welsing cites common Euro-American behaviors such as sunbathing or tanning, following African-American lifestyles, and co-opting African-American and other cultures as evidence of a deep-seated desire to be like people of color. Along the same line, X. Clark, McGee, Nobles, and Akbar have sought to explain the aggressive nature of the white minority through their research on the relationship between melanocytes, that is, specialized cells that synthesize and disperse melanin, and the nerve cells of the central nervous system. From their studies, they have discerned a high positive correlation between specific levels of sensory acuity and states of pigmentation. X. Clark, McGee, Nobles, and Akbar believe that melanin refines the central nervous system and, in so doing, produces a highly sensitized sensory motor network. This finding leads us again to the interplay between heredity and environment, and physiology and psychology, because melanocytes synthesize melanin through a series of biochemical reactions, many of which are known to affect one's mental state. Specifically, dopamine, necessary in the transfer of impulses from nerve endings to the brain and used in research on Parkinson's disease and schizophrenia, and epinephrine, or adrenaline. When we consume the amino acid phenylalanine, the amino acid tyrosine, under normal conditions, what is formed from the enzymatic action is phenylalanase and phenylalanine. Tyranase then catalyzes tyrosine to produce dopamine. Dopamine is oxidized into norepinephrine and converted to epinephrine. Finally, adrenaline or epinephrine is converted into melanin. The role of the adrenaline in emotional response has been documented for years. From a spiritual material perspective, we know that environmental constraints from the psychosocial and physical environment shape the way we perceive the world. The Caucasoids who began to take on the suboptimal view of the world that came to characterize Western thought were likely influenced by the short period of food production seasons of their environments and other factors as well. The material objects they perceived as necessary to survival became the primary focus of their reality and existence itself. All else was secondary. Out of this orientation, guiding values evolved. We can see how differences came to be handled how Caucasoids came to define themselves and their sense of worth, and how their concept of development emerged. The inability of Westerners to conceive another worldview in part bespeaks the great threat they believe it possesses. I will end here for today. I'm ending at segmentation ethical standards, which is where we'll pick up the next time.
And then it's good to see you again and to continue
Likewise.
our discussions. You know, in terms of optimal psychology, I think we need to figure out how does optimal psychology transmit to optimal behavior in that sense? Because we have identified the suboptimal system and all of its consequences, and suboptimal system really revolves around, you know, ego and individualism and selfishness and materialism and how should I put it, a focus on the senses and feelings and really the sensual physical aspect of the human being, with sort of mind as the regulator of that. Then we went back to the 17th century with and those people who, you know, cogito ergo sum, you know, I think therefore I am. And so the thinking mind is what is the master of everything, and is the master of materialism. So what we have this persona and philosophy that has developed out of that, which focuses on mind as intellect and as logic and rational, governing the physical material universe and the physical body. And there's no room there for spirit. And we've said that the African perspective, you know, back to our first civilization, is that spirituality is primary. I think we have identified pretty much that spirituality and consciousness is one and the same. And probably also we can include with consciousness that energy that goes along with it. And I think in the African sense, we identify, you know, consciousness, energy, and information. And we call that Amun, you know, Ra, and Ptah. I think in the Indian subcontinent, with Vedanta and so on, and Hinduism, if you will, they identify mostly Shiva and Shakti, which is consciousness and energy, as two sides of the same coin. And I think we add information, and I think that is important because the information is the wisdom aspect of the Shiva and the Shakti. And we need to go, I think, Linda, from the suboptimal psychology to the optimal psychology, which is an understanding of mind. But then I think, what is it that determines behavior? If you have an optimal psychology, how does that determine behavior? And so that behavior is appropriate in terms of both the individual and the community in which the individual lives, and also the systems that are created. I have a feeling something happened there.
I don't know what happened.
Were you able to hear me? I kind of handed it over to you. I don't know whether.
You know, it just cut out as for whatever reason, and now it's back. So I heard what you said initially in terms of the Western view, and the question really was how does optimal psychology contribute to a different understanding and different behavior? Yeah,
because in terms of the African understanding of humanity and basically the universe, Um, it is based on not the spirit per se, and the spirit is defined, but it's based on consciousness, it's based on energy, and it's based on information. And the ancients or our ancestors call that Amun as consciousness, Ra as energy, and Ptah as information or wisdom. That's the Trinity that created the universe, created us, and that's who we manifest per se. And in the Indian subcontinent, basically Vedanta and so on, they identify Shiva and Shakti, which Shiva, of course, is consciousness and Shakti is energy. That's two sides of the same coin. We as the originators, added wisdom to that, or understood that you can't just have consciousness and energy. You have to have something in there to make the energy move, or that the consciousness represents. So we have Ptah as the word, and of course we have Tehuti as the wisdom behind the word. But my point is, we're identifying an optimal psychology, which is different from the Western psychological approach, which is based, largely on materialism, and then the mind as, how shall I say, the intelligent aspect of consciousness, meaning that it has the ability to rationalize and to conceptualize and to compartmentalize and to be logical and so on. But it's all mind-based and body-based, and it does not go any deeper than that. And in terms of, let's say, the optimum Western psychology would be something of a peaceful mind, shall we say, that is able to be free of anxiety and fear, but it doesn't go any deeper than that. Now, in terms of optimal psychology from the African perspective, it goes deeper than that, because it goes to spirit and energy and wisdom. And I'm asking, how do you then determine, one, values, and two, behavior?
Absolutely.
Optimal psychology.
That is such an important issue, because what we see is that because of the fragmented view, there's no, and it's fragmented and as opposed to holistic, which for the African worldview, holism is essential. In fact, I'm just going to read a quote here. Central to the traditional African worldview is the conception that everything is unified, interdependent, and an integrated whole. There is an order inherent in the unity of this holistic orientation that can be seen at all levels of nature and provides the impetus for an integrated reality and the basis on which the optimal is defined. The supreme reality, that is the integrated reality, and the basis upon which the optimal is defined, is the essence of humankind and nature, and binds and orders the universe. So I think that once we conceive of all is energy, all is consciousness, and we infuse that Ptah, that wisdom, and that understanding that the unified whole has a natural order to it. It's not just random. And our ancestors were so committed to understanding themselves, and they understood nature was a part of themselves. So they were very good scientists and careful observers of nature. And the essence that we would see as formlessness is the source of all form. Nature of being and existence is the expression of the limitless and infinite. All existence forms a multidimensional channel through which one is consciously connected to the ancestors yet unborn, nature, and community. This orientation is the foundation of African science, whose achievements have been evidenced by the pyramids, mathematics, astrology, and a unifying standard of ethics, in the name, or to name just a few, so that when one sees one's essence and physical being as connected and interdependent, the cycling that we look at in that natural order lets us know that there is an order. There has to be a ethical standard which we have to adhere to in order to, shall I say, be in the flow of nature. So the same is true in present day. Interestingly, even in the diaspora, we see that the reverence for nature requires that we don't just randomly go out and kill things. We don't shoot elephants for their tusk, or we don't randomly kill animals. Even if we're killing them for food, we honor them. We actually pay attention to giving some credence to their existence as an extension of ours. When you do that, it means then that there is a certain rationality, intuitiveness to our relationships to one another and to all of nature, so that being in harmony with nature. So you can almost go back to those principles of Ma'at. And ultimately, in doing that, we see that each is valued and studied based on its integration and interdependence. In traditional culture, it is out of harmony or rhythm with nature that we seek well-being and survival of the whole. So it's a shift in consciousness, it's a shift in mindset, and it's a shift in how we're seeing ourselves in the world. And that allows then for a holistic view. Well, it actually defines the holistic view of optimal psychology, because our self-worth and identity are in tune with the whole and ultimate conception of the one. My worth is intrinsic, so my orientation to all that is, as an extension to me, is one of value and appreciation and compassion and ultimately justice, because I see very clearly, because of that relationship, my essence is most likely supported and reinforced by those things that will support all energy systems, all nature, all human interaction as well. So I think there's an awareness that makes us feel worthy. And we don't have a need to have control over, or manipulation of, or domination over. We don't have the greed, we don't have the negative emotions and feelings and perceptions that really drive us to behave so badly. But rather we have a sense of peace and security and well-being that we understand comes to us by virtue of who and what we are as an expression of the whole, of the oneness, of the totality. And so being then, our focus is how can I say, our focus is on being in the flow, being in harmony with that, being in balance. Behavior is shaped by an inherent ethical standard. External factors can neither add nor detract from our essence. When existence is experienced beyond the five senses as spiritual reality, apprehended in an extrasensory fashion in order to be fully known, feelings become a very important sensory mechanism. Feelings also become a means of guidance on the pathway to higher consciousness, serving an implicit self-correcting monitor for ethics. Holistic development is evidenced by human and ethical concerns. This is consistent with the Afrocentric process of intuology. As we know, intuology means all things are interconnected and interrelated through human and spiritual networks. So if I understand that we're all connected through human and spiritual networks, I'm more likely to be wanting to be loving and compassionate and harmony and caring and considerate and all the things that we would like to see when we're interested in creating a culture of health. Does that help?
Yes. You mentioned order as primary in terms of the personal investigation, shall we say, and then you went on to mention Ma'at, and that's central to what we talked about, meaning consciousness, energy, and wisdom or information, because the wisdom comes from the understanding of order, that the universe is created out of order, and that there is order in the universe, and everything has its place, and everything is interconnected. And in order to be interconnected, therefore there must be communication, and that communication, because the universe is infinite and eternal, then that has to be instantaneous. And of course we get, and of course that's known for 4,000, 5,000 BC or 10,000 BC. This is the basis of our civilization, this understanding. Of course, now the material scientists have come to this in terms of, what they call, now they're speaking of fields, and this is the quantum field. Well, again, we said that more than 6,000 years ago, that this was the source, quantum field. And some people call it God, etc. And what you've been describing is our ability to become aware of this as our source and our connection. And then we get into the concept of the hologram and so on, which takes us deeper into another aspect of science. But the way, one of the ways in which I see it is that we're all born perfect in the sense that we're aspects of the infinite. Now, we've been socialized by our culture and educated by our culture into these beliefs. And these beliefs can be religious, or they can be scientific, or they can be philosophical, sociological, and they're all of these, the whole panorama of the educational process, which we get, from primary school all the way up to university and the PhDs and so on and so forth. There's a paradigm behind all of these systems, which we become educated in. And the educational process that we get in the West, and it's not prevalent everywhere, is simply fitting us to participate in these systems, which, as we have described them before, they're largely predatory type of systems based on materialism that's trying to gain as much for certain people as possible at the expense of other people, or as much for each individual as possible. Now, what's the purpose of somebody having $50 billion or $100 billion? What is the purpose of that when you have homeless people? You have people who are hungry, all over the world. And the reason of why this person has the 50 billion is because that he's extracting the wealth of other people and the rest of the universe and accumulating it for himself in terms of money. And wealth has now been converted into money. And that's the purpose of life. The 42 principles of Ma'at are the foundation of our civilization, meaning our African civilization. And it's the foundation of how we should be relating to each other through the oneness that we are, that we came into the universe as. And, most of us don't remember, what we were when we came into the universe, because we've been indoctrinated from the earliest point in time. So we buy into the system, and we don't think there's anything else but the system. and therefore, once one determines the unsatisfactoriness of their life being lived within the system. And one starts to look for an alternative and develop some knowledge of the alternative, which is what we're discussing as the old new paradigm, which is, the African paradigm of putting people first, and the fact that we're manifestations of the larger whole. We need a method to be able to, shall we say, get back to ourselves.
Yes.
To have that journey back to ourselves, so that we can rediscover who we were when we came. And I love that Zen koan, which says, what was your original face before you were born? And what that means is looking at your mind as a mirror, and looking in the mirror of your mind to see your original face. And I think that, a systematic method is needed for people to look into their minds, because the whole basis of what we're talking about and what has happened to us has been an indoctrination of our minds. And what we're projecting is a liberation of our minds from the slavery that it has been indoctrinated with, or been enslaved by, which are these false ideas and false objectives in terms of human life and prosperity and happiness and freedom and so on. To me, the methodology, therefore, is mindfulness, meaning self-knowledge, looking at mind. And that type of analysis to really get to, who was I before I was indoctrinated into this mess that is called, the Western civilization.
So very true. I just love what you're saying, Dr. Garvey, because we come full circle. You started earlier talking about the consciousness, the energy, the wisdom. And if we are the energy manifest as consciousness, without wisdom, we're not really in harmony or in balance or in the flow. But because our ancestors were so clear, they had put before us the 42 declarations of innocence. So our way of living and moving through the world, even though the Europeans call them the negative confessions, the reality is they were declarations of innocence that structured our conscious, so we knew what was right and what was wrong. There was an ethical standard implicit in the way we be in the world. We were being becoming, and we understood our becoming was really contingent upon being in tune and in harmony with the totality of all that is. And that intrinsic sense of worth allowed us and does allow us to behave in a certain kind of way. So as with African people almost anywhere and indigenous people almost anywhere, when they find the European coming, they don't try to kill them. They what? Welcome them and embrace them, not ever having known a people to behave as they have historically behaved. But for African people today, we really, really, really have to become committed to, first of all, developing the kind of knowledge of self that allows us to feel. Because we said for an African worldview and the oneness that we're speaking, that is the totality, feeling is essential. And so if we're not having that built-in capacity to feel the peace that comes with the realization of who we really are, and from that peace feel the love and the support and the security put forth by those who come before us, our ancestors and future generations and nature and community, it's almost virtually impossible to shift out of that worldview in which we've been mis-socialized. I think about the fact that because of the materialism, we have been so mis-socialized that we let people mistreat us. I'm thinking of, remember when the banks were too big to fail? And out of their greed and out of their exploitation and manipulation of poor people, they just basically stole so much money, they were about to fail. But what did our leaders say? Oh, they're too big to fail. Let's bail them out. Who bailed them out? The common people who are still paying for having bailed them out. And the extreme wealth that we're seeing, that disparity in wealth, came about by those decisions of the power brokers to say, oh, let's not worry about the poor people who are bailing out the banks. Let the bankers make multiple millions of dollars. And economists pinpoint that's really where the wealth gap really began to manifest in such an extreme fashion. My point is, when you see yourself as one with the totality of being, and you have the consciousness to see, well, that's not right. Why should we reward people who were unjust, stealing, exploiting with more money so they can continue to do what they've been doing? So I think not only do we have to come to that shift in consciousness that we've been talking about as optimal for ourselves, for our own individual well-being, it's essential for the collective, for the community, and for the totality of humanity, because we're really being pushed off the cliff to destruction by our consciousness, and how it's been shaped by powers who have always had the same commitment to materialistic greed, power over, and control. But the key in that kind of social context is to what? Use the power you have to think for yourself, to define reality for yourself, and to investigate that relationship you have with the totality, with the oneness, and how the kind of ethical standards that are just going to be inherent in that way of experiencing the world. We know, because of oneness, I don't want to send anything out that I don't want coming back, because eventually whatever I send out will be back. There are people with a fragmented view who have not gotten that understanding. Probably won't.
Yeah, true. One of the things you just said about, values being intrinsic, and I think that's very important, because one of the things that are talked about, ethical values, particularly, let's say, in terms of Christianity at the present time, you have to behave in this way, and you have to behave in that way, and you have to behave in this way. But then the behavior changes from one year to the next. Now we have people who don't know exactly what sex they belong to, and they're going to choose their own sex. It has nothing anymore to do with nature. And and the skirts go up, and the bathing suits are now down, and they're quarreling if Muslim ladies cover themselves. That's supposed to be wrong. So you have this whole idea of ethical values that are changing, and they change from one year to the next. And then you're demonized if you don't validate the new changes, because the majority has now said that this is the way the new thing should be. Do we have abortion or don't we have abortion? Who should get an abortion or who should not get an abortion? First trimester or second trimester? And you go on and on. And who should be vaccinated or not vaccinated? If you don't get vaccinated, somehow you're a bad guy. If you get vaccinated, somehow you're a good guy. Although we don't know the dangers of vaccination, and nothing is thought through based on any particular principle that is, how should I say, eternal, and it's basic to nature, because we're human beings and we're part of human nature. And we can't just go around inventing from year to year a new set of values. And this is what is current in the Western sense. I mean, in the Victorian era, you could do this and that and that. Okay, that type of slavery was okay. And now, you can't even teach about slavery that took place in that particular time. So you have this moving line, and all that does is to create confusion. Whereas, as you mentioned, ethical values are intrinsic, because ethical values come about in terms of how they're manifested in human behavior, but they come about from your source, who you are, the oneness that you are with the universe, and the order that is subsumed in terms of that oneness. You can't have oneness without order. You can't have oneness that is chaos. There's no, it's impossible. It's a contradiction in terms. You cannot have oneness that is chaotic. You can only have oneness that is order. And if we agree that the essence and source of the universe is a oneness that transcends the multiplicity that is there, that creates it, supports it, and transforms it, and then, that's the basis of everything, including our ethical standards. And we've been talking about Ma'at and the 42 principles, or as you put them, declarations of innocence. Now, the only way you can get to manifest that is if your consciousness is at that level where it's no longer an individual consciousness, but it is one consciousness with the source. And this is what is considered, being one with God. And somehow that became blasphemy in terms of Western Christianity. You could not say, I am one with God, or I am God. That's your blasphemy. God is out there, or he's up there, and it's not even a she, actually, it's a he up there somewhere, and he's looking down on you, and you should pray to him, or plead for his mercy. So, so many things are out of kilter in terms of the Western system, and everything is compartmentalized into a different area. This is religion, and this is education, this is commerce and industry, and this is important. We can enslave people because we need their free labor to build up, the industrial machine, or the industrialization process. So the church says it's okay. That's the morals of the church at that particular time. And as you know, one of the first ships out of Spain or Portugal, to take slaves to the West where we are, was the good ship Jesus. And I think it was one of the bishops in Mexico or someplace that said, you know what, we're killing off these natives here. We better get some Africans. I think they can stand the hard labor. And he wrote back to the papacy to tell them, and so on. So the morality that is present in the suboptimal system and is part of that system is a moving feast of, what you like today. Take your pick. Should the skirts be above the knee or below the knee? Should your heels be this long, tall, or should you wear flats? Should you be sleeping around, or should you be monogamous? I mean, what style is it today? You can't be monogamous. Come on, that's silly. Like you're 14 and you're still a virgin, and on and on and on. I mean, this moving scenario of ethical values, it's totally meaningless because it's not grounded in the reality of who we are as a people and our relationship to our source. And this is the crisis that we face, as we've talked about it, whether it's in healthcare, or in terms of wars, as we see it in Ukraine, And, we're reading about the suicides and so on in the teenagers, and that's the latest thing on the front page of the New York Times, if you will. And on and on and on, the dysfunctionality of the system. The Burger Kings and the Coca-Cola and the obesity, and then you have a pill for obesity and a pill for obesity that the Burger Kings and the McDonald's and all these things create in you with their high fructose corn syrup and their hydrogenated fats. So it's a system at war with itself. And, at risk of being repetitious, we need to understand this so that we actively look for something different, a different.
Absolutely.
And we should know that this was the paradigm of our ancestors, and this is what we're looking for, which is African humanism. And our societies initially all had some meaning to it. The current societies are meaningless. They're not based on anything that is natural to the individual. They're based on accumulating things. Now, how many things can you accumulate? What was it today I saw? Andy Warhol's painting or something of Marilyn Monroe, and it went for like 100 million or 120. I mean, my God. I'm not sure Marilyn herself was worth that much.
Well,
What value? Where's the value? Who creates that value? It's all this individualistic conceptual idea of what is value. It has no basis in reality. Whereas what we're talking about are ethical values that are grounded in Mother Nature, because it has to do with the order that is present in Mother Nature right from the beginning, right from creation.
And that's never been a part of the cultural heritage that we've been missocialized and are being missocialized into. And as you point out, then, if you start out with a fragmented assumption about reality, what that allows the powers that be, I don't know if they knew it or not, but I suspect they did. They said, we can't have these people understanding they're one with the source of all good. We need to break that up, put God up here, put them down there, put ourselves in as the intermediary. And that way we can change whenever we decide what's right and what's not right. And that kind of foundation is without an ethical standard. And therefore, the changes that you keep pointing out are just a moving target, changed by virtue of what the powers that be have determined positions them to have more control and enhances their capacity to manipulate the people into doing things that are, for the most part, self-destructive. So we see a deterioration of humanity over time. And I don't know that unless we can shift the consciousness back to that akin to our ancestors, if we won't just self-destruct, because ultimately that's the only place a fragmented worldview can lead you to, is self-destruction. And we see it so rapid. There's so many signs coming in our faces today before our eyes that this system doesn't work. Not the least of which is the children committed to suicide, or extremely successful people, Black women in particular. Comes to mind the Black woman who was Miss USA, who had an MBA, had a this, that, and the other, and she thought she was worthless and couldn't cope. A teenager, similarly situated, just committed suicide earlier this week. So if you control the way people think, you control the people. You don't have to relegate them to an inferior status. They will seek it for themselves. And this is just another example of the way our thinking has been controlled. But the beauty is, Dr. Garvey, as we've been talking about over and over again, we don't have to let someone else define reality for us. particularly when they misdefine it and they've got everything wrong from the nature of what's real to what's of value. And the absence of an ethical standard is so critical to the survival of humanity, because without an ethical standard, how are you going to know right from wrong? Well, you won't. And therefore, the powers that be can say, well, this is right, even though it's dead wrong. Or this is wrong, even though it's dead right. And that's essentially the missocialization in the cultural environment within which we have been placed at this time. In fact, one of the things that we must do is learn to cultivate the ability to distinguish between right and wrong, distinguish between the real and unreal. And that was a teaching of Jehudi, thousands of years ago. There's no survival without developing and cultivating those capacities.
You brought up the word meaning, and that's one of the problems that when you just talked about suicides, etc. It's the meaninglessness of the society in which we live. And we go back to our traditions and our sources, and the earliest story ever told in the whole universe, human universe, the earliest story ever told is the story of Ausar, Auset, and Heru. And it's a psychological tale, which a lot of people don't understand that. And the Heru in this situation, and of course the word hero comes from it. But Heru is the one that makes this journey as a youngster in terms of growing up, and makes this long journey in some sense away from home, and does battle with Seth, who represents the fragmented worldview that we've been talking about. And in the story, it's Seth and his 72 assessors, acquaintances, shall we say, or buddies, and 72 is a significant number. And of course, Seth is the one who had killed his brother, who was Ausar, and Ausar represented, who we are or who we're supposed to be. And I go back to my statement I made a little bit earlier, that I believe we all enter this world, this physical world, as perfect human beings, made by God, if you will, with all the capacity that we have, that's given to us as this is our gift that we come with in order to present this or manifest this within our society. This is what we come with. Enormous gifts, all of us, millions and millions and billions of us have gifts of one type or another to manifest it. But our society transforms us. This type of society transforms us. You go to the African society, and what we were talking about, the oldest story ever told, says that the prototype, the human prototype, was Ausar, which is the enlightened human being, which later on you could call him a Buddha or whatever. And unfortunately, when you transform it into the Western tradition, they talk about it as a mystical experience of union with God, and you have all these other things, and as if to say it is supernatural. It's not supernatural, it's natural. This was understood in terms of our societies, and it was understood to be for every man. This was a common story that everybody in the society knew. It was not a supernatural event that only one or two people could attain to by virtue of austerity or some other contemplative esoteric way of living. No, this was the ordinary, everyday man was supposed to live this way, a meaningful life, understanding his oneness with source, which is Osar, which is the way you came into this universe. And an educational system was supposed to bring this out of you. And education was no different from religion. As a matter of fact, we know that there was no word for religion in Kenya. There was no such word in the whole vocabulary. You were educated into this particular way of life, which was natural. And Osar was this prototype, if you will, and is now this possibility of negativity, and you give in to this possibility of negativity over time. But then, as you develop and as you grow, then you realize that this is not the way you should live, because it's confusion and it's ignorance and so on. So then the other aspect of you, which is outset, and it's very detailed, so I'm just going to skim it, begins to recognize that this is not the way to go. And therefore, you begin to look into your mind, and that's who and what outset is. Outset is awareness, and awareness looks into the mind and has a relationship with source, which is Ausar. In other words, remembers Ausar. As you know, Seth cut Ausar up into 14 pieces, and 14 is like twice sevens, and 7 is a big number. It's symbolic in terms of Kemet and so on and so forth. So she put these pieces together, meaning you're remembering now, and you're looking into your mind and seeing the fragmentation. But then behind the fragmentation, you see the unity. And she has this non-physical relationship with Ausar, which is this oneness. And out of that comes Heru. And she's impregnated, and Heru is born, who is the hero, who is now going to make this complete by battling Seth and overcoming Seth, and then triumphing in his own way. And then with triumph, he resurrects Ausar, meaning that he now finds himself. So this is the meaning of this journey of life, that if you get sidetracked into this negativity, looking into your mind, looking into yourself with awareness, then you can defeat ego over time and become what you were before. And this is the journey that we need to make at this point in time. And this is the journey that our ancestors put before us. At this point in time, it would be 8,000 years ago, something like that, or 6 to 8,000 years ago. I mean, it's amazing. It's all there.
It is true.
All there. And it's been misunderstood over time. It's been overlooked. People have denigrated it, etc., etc. But it's the basis of all meditation techniques that surfaced in terms of Hinduism, that surfaced in China in terms of Taoism, and that surfaced in Judeo-Christianity and the mystical traditions, but particularly in the Eastern Church, the divinization of man that is the Eastern Orthodox Church has held to that over time. The Western Church has more or less banished it because, like Meister Eckhart and people like that who had mystical experiences, the church wouldn't accept it. They said because God was up there and man was down here, and it's only Holy Communion or whatever that you could get this absolution and then get to go to heaven. They had to go through the hierarchy of the papacy and all this other nonsense. Well, I shouldn't say that. I mean, I don't want to say too much against anybody's religion, but all religion is based on the same thing, which is spirituality, and just that some people have a dogma and a ritual that might take you away from your spirituality, and others have some understanding of what it should be. But I think it's remarkable that ours is there from the beginning, and we've been uncultured, shall we say, away from it. and with all the harm that it has done with us, not just the enslavement of our bodies, but the enslavement of our minds. And ultimately, if you enslave our mind, then you enslave our spirit. And then we have this, wonderful system and tradition of being able to free our bodies, free our minds, and free our spirit. And we need to get back to that.
I love this idea of Set as awareness and Asar as that divine consciousness realized. And so the marrying of awareness with that divine consciousness gives birth to Heru, which is all of us, but still even having been produced by awareness with the divine consciousness, we'll still have to fight Set.
Yes.
It's the natural order. It's the natural order, but Heru always wins.
And by the way, Set did not allow Heru to kill Seth. Heru wanted to kill Seth, but Set said, no, he's part of the family. You can't kill him. So what they did with Seth was they put him underneath the boat to lift up the boat for the millions of years, the boat of eternity. So Seth is a power that we have, but it's misused. That's what it is. So when Heru controls Seth, then everything is okay, because you control that energy of life, as opposed to having it being fragmented and doing anything that it wants to do. Now it submits to order and to wisdom.
And it's necessary. So there's no killing Set. Has a role to play. But if we could just come to realize such the wisdom and beauty and the roadmap, our ancestors were so brilliant. They left us a roadmap. If we can just break free enough to seek our own knowledge, wisdom, and understanding and affirmation. So thank you so much, Dr. Garvey. This is another wonderful conversation.
It's been my pleasure, and I think it's so important for us to understand that there is another way, because over time now, in the previous weeks, we've pointed out how we have been captured and how that manifests in terms of life, but this is the way we should be, and this is the way we should go, and it's not darkness, it's light. So we need to go from the darkness to the light, and it's been something, the roadmap, as you call it, has been laid down there, from 6,000 plus years ago, and if you look at it almost from the reverse, God wouldn't send us here without a roadmap of how to negotiate our way in the world, So he gave us this roadmap from the first human beings, which is us, and he said to these first human beings, when they experience consciousness, he said, this is the way to go. And they recorded it. They told the story and then they wrote it down and it's there. But they've destroyed our books and they tried to destroy the temples and even the things on the wall. They tried to chisel out images and so on and so forth. But we're back.
Yes, yes. And we'll have triumph. So we will continue to do so. And we want to encourage our listeners to get in touch with that epigenetic memory of transcendence. They keep wanting to put you back into the trauma, and that exists too. But just like there's a memory of the trauma, there is a memory of the transcendence. And so that's what we've been talking about, how to tap into that memory, remembering.
Yes, yes.
Well, thank you so much, and peace and blessings to all. Until the next time.
Wonderful.
Peace abide.
Thank you, Linda.
You're welcome.